DAX User-Defined Functions let you package DAX logic and reuse it like any other DAX function. UDFs introduce a new function keyword, optional parameters, and type checking helpers that make authoring safer and cleaner. Functions are first-class model objects you can create and manage in the DAX Query View, the TMDL view, and they can be viewed in the Model Explorer under the Functions node. Oh my god, that was so boring. Let's just try understanding the new user-defined functions my way once again. Alright, in the recent September 2025 update, Microsoft announced a new feature, DAX feature, called User-Defined Functions. These are just like Power Query's custom functionality. Now you also have it in DAX. Any reusable logic, you can package that into a UDF, and you can probably use that over and over again in your model. Now, obviously, to be able to use this feature, you need to be at least on the September 2025 update. I'm going to show you how do you activate that, and then we'll take a look at how do you write these user-defined functions. So I'm going to go over to the file right here. In the file, I'm going to go over to options and settings. By the way, I already have September 2025 update. In options, I am going to go under preview features right here, and then I'll have the DAX user-defined functions right here. You can just check on that, click on OK. You might have to restart your Power BI. That's all right. You can open a new instance of Power BI and you will have UDFs ready. Now, you not really see anything on the screen of Power BI, but you will have to go to the query view to start working with these functions. All right, I'm in the DAX query view, and that's where you start to create functions. And the keyword that you use to create function is the define keyword. So I'm going to write define. At the moment, I'm just teaching you the simplistic syntactical understanding of how to create a function. We'll obviously create more complicated functions, but for now, this is how we start. So define keyword that has already been there. You can use define to create columns or measures, but this time we're going to use a function keyword instead. So I'm creating a function. This function keyword has been added newly in the September 2025 update, in case you heard my boring definition at the start. Now, after you write the function keyword, you have to provide the name of the function. What function are you creating? So I'm going to call this as test product because I'm trying to create a function that multiplies two numbers, as boring and as simplistic as that. So test product is the name of my function. I provide an equals to sign, and then I put in the brackets. Now, inside of the parentheses, you're supposed to declare or not declare as many variables as you would want from the user. So let's just say that at least to multiply two numbers, I want two numbers from the user to give it to me in my function. Then I can multiply those two numbers. So let's just say that I'm going to call this as n1, number one, and n2 as number two. Now, once the user gives me these n1 and n2 inputs, whatever number these are, I can then multiply these functions, these two input parameters. Once you have declared as many input parameters that you would want in the function, you then go ahead and convert it into a function by using the goes to operator. And I can just do the equals to sign and greater than symbol. And this symbol, which I call it the rocket sign, is going to convert it into a function. It's the same in Power Query, by the way. So then I'm going to say that how do I want to define the logic of the function? And the logic of the function is simple enough. Take these two numbers and just multiply them, as simple as that. So I'm going to say, hey, I want to take n1 and I want to multiply that with n2, and that's about it. Now, as soon as I completed my function, you're going to see that this obviously has given me the update model, add new function kind of thing. I can just click right here. I can click on update the model, and this particular function test product has now been added in the functions node right here in the query view. Now, you can obviously use this function wherever you would like. You can use this function to make a table. Obviously, this would not return a table, but you can use functions generally to create a table. You can use functions to create measures. You can use functions to create columns, and you can also use functions in visual calculations. Now, at the moment, I'm going to show you that in case you do not really want to leave the query view, how do you test out the function here itself? So I'm going to say, hey, function, I am trying to do the evaluate statement because everything in query view is obviously done by the evaluate statement. And I'm going to say that, hey, evaluate this particular function, the test product function. The two numbers are 10 and 5. The answer obviously is going to be 50. Now, if I happen to click on run, this is obviously not going to run it, and it's going to give me an error, because this test product gives me a 50 answer, and a 50 is a scalar value, and I cannot really return a scalar value. However, if I maybe wrap that around in the curly bracket, this becomes a table, and now this function can run fine, and I get the value as 50. Simple as that. Now, this particular test product function could have been used in a measure as well. So if I just go back right here, I have this kind of table set up here to take you through more advanced examples. But for now, if I just go ahead and create a test measure, and I use my test product right here, you can see that it just gives me in the formula suggestion box right here, I can say test, and this actually shows me the n1 and n2, which are the two parameters that I passed. I can give it two numbers. I'm going to say 90, 40. That is going to be 3600. And then if I just maybe click on save, you're going to see that this actually appears now in my test right here, which is the new measure that I created. I drag it, and it actually gives me the value 3600, which is nice. Now, obviously, this is not of any use. So let's just start to create more practical and more interesting examples of user-defined functions. Quick interruption in the video in case you're liking the video so far and you're wondering that how can I learn these skills of writing good DAX, good data modeling, the M language behind Power Query, and all of the nuances of Power BI that makes it work. I have brilliant courses on Power BI, especially the Power Query part, the DAX part, data modeling part, and the M language part. In the courses, I take you from a beginner level and take you to more advanced concepts, try to explain you the logic of how things are working so that you feel confident in applying the learnings to even on your own data sets. Hundreds and hundreds of students have joined my courses and they have benefited a lot. In case you're interested, the link for the courses is going to be down in the description of the video. Let's get back to the video. Like I said, when you're trying to work with user-defined functions, the way to understand is that in case you are trying to take any particular piece of DAX code and you're trying to replicate that long piece of DAX code across multiple measures so that the same logic can be carried through, that kind of use is apt for the user-defined functions. Let me just show you one such example. Let's just say that I've got this simple slicer right here, which is where we have year and the month. And in the pivot table, I have got the date, and against that I have total sales. Now let's just say that I'm trying to build a measure that checks, are you a high value day or not? That means the sale of that particular day, did that exceed $150 or not? That's the threshold that I'm setting myself. So does this exceed $150? The answer is no. Does it exceed $150? The answer is no. Does this exceed $150? The answer is yes. And in case the answer is yes, I just want to maybe like do a green dot here. I have a red dot, but I want to do a green dot. Now this is what I would want across all of these values right here. And at the end of this particular month, which is the month of March, I want to go ahead and give a count of how many dots are there inside of this. And this particular logic obviously need to be defined in a DAX measure first. Whatever logic I define in a DAX measure, I want to then use that same logic for high value, whatever, high value commission, high value units, or whatever that I would want. This is the kind of logic that I'm trying to. Now let's just see how can we first build this logic and then how can we make a function out of it. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start to create a measure. The logic of this particular measure is going to be something like this. Hey, I'm just going to say that, hey, I am first trying to find out the high value table. The high value table is nothing but a simple check that please take a look at the calendar. The calendar simply means one row equals to 1 day, and find the sales within that particular one row. That means for 1 day, and check if that is more than $150 or not. So I'm going to use the filter function. In the filter function, I'm going to say, hey, please go inside every single row of the calendar table. In every single row of the calendar table, please check that is the total sales, which is right here. I have already made a measure for total sales. Is the total sales greater than or equal to $150 or not? Now, this particular filter function is going to give me a table and with rows that I have passed the filter, that is the date more than $150 or not. The next thing that I would want to do is just count the number of rows there are. So I'm going to maybe create another variable right here, and I'm going to call this variable as a count table. And I'm going to go ahead. This is not VAT, but this is actually a var. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start just counting the rows on this particular table. So for which I can use a very simple count rows function. So I can just say count rows of the high value table that I have created, and that's pretty much it. Now I want to do some sophisticated stuff to apply the dot. So I'm going to create a variable called the dot variable to apply the dot, and I'm going to say that if check for two things. If you're working against the date, which is this particular date or whatever date, if you work against the date, and if this particular count rows has given you more than one value, that means the day is actually $150 and above, then I want to place a dot. So I'm going to check for two things, and my two things are as follows. So I'm going to say, hey, why don't you check that are you working in the scope of the calendar date or not? That's my first check. The second check that I want to make is the count table, which is the number of rows that have passed the filter. Is that more than equal to 1 or not? If these two conditions are true, then I want to place a dot. So I can just maybe use the inverted commas right here, and I can just say that, hey, in the inverted commas, please place a dot. And the trick to do that is by using the star and the dot, and the star and the dot is going to bring up the emojis right here, and I can call this as a green dot. Pick up the green dot from here. It's kind of good to go, and that's my green dot. It doesn't show green at the moment, but that's all right. It'll come up as green. So, and that's it. If this particular condition is not true, then I just want to give the count table parameter right here, and that's pretty much it. And then once I am done with this, I just want to wrap up my function, and I want to say that, hey, why don't you return the dot as the final output? Now, once I drag my high value sales measure inside of my pivot table, you're going to see that we have the dots everywhere, which is pretty good. These are 9 dots, and I can just see that 9 is also the number of high value days that I've had in the month of March, or in the month of April. I had how many? 14 days, and I can just have the dots right here, which is pretty nice. Now, the thing is that I wrote this long function or measure, and now I want to repeat the same calculation across commission as well. That means I have a threshold for commission, some threshold, and I want to test commission, and I want to see that are you a high value day for commission as well. And I want to do such things for many other measures. Can we come up with a shorter function, a user-defined function that contains the logic that I have defined, put it into a user-defined function, and then we can work with that. Let's just try doing that. All right, I'm back at my query view, which is the place where you define the functions. I've opened up a new query right here and I've got the blank query. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to simply copy and paste the definition of the measure or the measure that I wrote right here and convert it into a function. So I'm going to maybe do a control V. The measure is right here. Now, because there is no defined keyword at the start, this is actually all giving you an error. So let's just do actually all of that. So I'm going to start with a defined keyword and I'm trying to define a function, and this is the code of that function. And let's just call this as my high value function. Now, in the high val function, if you think about it, what is exactly that you would want it from the user are the parameters that I'm going to declare it in the parentheses. Now, this is the place where whatever the user is supposed to input in case you want to make this as a scalable logic. Take a look at the function once again. So if you take a look at the first variable, since we are making a check against the very date, I am going to run this particular calculation in the calendar table only, and this is something that I don't want to change. So I would not ask this as a variable. And if you take a look at this one, I would want to obviously ask that this check currently was against a hard-coded expression of total sales, but the user can provide any other measure. This could be refunds, units sold, commission value, whatever that is. So this is something that I would want it as a variable or as an input parameter from the user. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say that I want a calculation. So my calc, this calculation is going to come as one of the variables. So this is my first variable. Then I would also want the user is going to set what is the threshold. So at the moment, the threshold is set as 150, but I would want the user to set the target. So I'm going to call this as my target. This is my second variable. Now, once you have defined that, there is a thing to understand that. Now, whatever target the user is giving it to you, the same target value is going to be applied right here or wherever you're using in the function. But if the user is giving you a calculation, which is technically a measure, you don't really want to evaluate the measure here. You want to evaluate the measure inside every single row of the calendar table. So imagine there is a calendar table which has the first row, the second row, the third row, the fourth row, the fifth row, and you want to take this calculation that you have given the user as an input. The calculation is not going to be evaluated as soon as the user puts it, but is going to be evaluated when it is called in the filter function. That means here it is going to be evaluated, and the daily sales number is going to change, or the daily refunds number is going to change, because it's not the overall number. It's going to be, as per the filter context of the day, and then another filter context of the another day, and another filter context of the another day. So how do you decide what filter context is applied? By default, the filter context that is applied is whenever you declare a calculation, that filter context is applied. But in case you want to alter the filter context and you want to run the calculation within the function, then you have to declare it as an expression. So the way you do that is by going to the variable name, providing a semicolon, and then you can see that you get a bunch of these things. And this is where you can just call it as an expression. That means it's an expression. It is only going to be evaluated when called inside any of the formula. And simple as that. If you do not write an expression, it is considered as a value. That means as soon as the user is entering the value here, it is going to be taken just as the way it is and not change the context whenever you call it within the function. So that's the thing to understand. Now, once we have done that, so high value is the name of the function. We have provided two inputs, the calc input and the target input. We still have to convert it into a function by using the equals to and the greater than sign. That's my rocket sign. It has converted that into a function. That's nice. But yet we have not used the calc and the target within the formulas right here. So I'm just going to say, hey, the calendar table is fixed. Good. But the total sales is not going to be total sales. Instead, it's going to be this particular calculation, which is right here. So I'm going to maybe cancel that right here and call this as my calc. And this is not going to be 150. This is actually going to be my target. That's it. And whatever this filter is returning, I'm just counting the number of rows of that. And the logic is pretty much the straightforward logic. And this is nothing but returning the dot. Simple as that. Now, let's just add it to the model. So add it to the model, click on OK. And we now have the high value function added right here. Now, let's just start to use this particular function. So I'm going to go ahead and this time I'm going to create a new measure and I'm going to go and say that, hey, I'm trying to find high, and the logic for that is high val. That's my logic that I have built, which packs all the logic, checks against a certain date. Now it's asking me for two things. What's your calculation, which is as an expression. So I can say, hey, I'm trying to evaluate commission and the target is $20. That's it. So I click on that. I press enter. This makes it into a formula, and this is now a much shorter formula for you to write. I can just drag that right here, and this actually gives me the green dot. Now, since there are just one green dot and just gives me one, let's just also check the value. So if I just maybe bring the commission in here, let's just see that all of the values where you have a green dot, are they more than $20 or not? Sure enough, this is more than $20. Pretty good. If I just maybe kind of change the logic, and if I say that, hey, this high value commission, I'm just trying to relax the logic or relax the target here and see that if it against $10 or not. If I just maybe click on commit, the logic changes and you have a lot more cells highlighted right here, and those are again 9 in number. That's pretty awesome. The next best use of function that I believe that a lot of people are going to eventually adapt is creating a calendar table. Now at the moment, if you take a look at my model right here, I have the calendar table, and this calendar table does not show any kind of DAX code in the form formula bar because I've created this calendar table using Power Query and not the DAX language. Now, in case you have a lot of columns in here and you're using some kind of DAX code to create the calendar table, and that's fine. Just that it creates an untidy environment of Power BI and the formula bar takes up a lot of space where the code is written and the calendar table actually starts with here. It just kind of is a mess and I don't really like it. And that's why I have moved from creating calendar tables using DAX to creating calendar tables using Power Query. Now, using user-defined functions, you can make neat and clean calendar table with just one line of code. Like I said, the user-defined functions can be used to create tables, measures, columns, or visual calculations. So I'm going to show you one application of creating a calendar table. So I'm going to go over to the DAX Query View right here and open up a new query. And I'm going to go ahead and paste the code of a calendar table, which obviously you can get in multiple places. All right, I've pasted the code of the calendar table and you can see that this is an autocal function that I have created that accepts no input. I'm using a calendar auto function, so there's no input. But in case you want to make the function more sophisticated, where you want to apply how many columns you want, which fiscal year you want, you can declare all of that in the parentheses and this is going to function well, right? You know the logic of creating the calendar table. You can take the parameters and put that in the parentheses and this is going to function well. At the moment, I am just creating a simplistic calendar table that has the columns of a month and the month index and the quarter and the year, and it returns a table but just takes no input. We've defined this as a function here so that my DAX becomes cleaner. Now, once I have done the function, I'm going to update this function and add it to the model, and we have autocal has been added as a function right here. Let's just start using that in a table. So I'm going to go over to the table right here and I'm going to make a new table and I'm going to call this as my calendar 2, and I'm going to use the autocal function. The autocal function obviously doesn't have any inputs because I haven't declared those inputs, but as soon as I commit on this, you can see that now just using a simple line of DAX, you have created a table right here using a user-defined function. The benefit of this is that if you go back to the query view, which is right here, and if you just say that, hey, for some reason I don't really want to have the quarter column, you can have as long as table as you would want and choose the columns that you would need. So if I just maybe turn that off and I don't really want this column and I update the model with the changes, click on OK, update the model, you're going to see that in the calendar tool that we have created, which is right here, the quarter column is gone and we don't really have it. So you can have as sophisticated functions as possible, turn on or turn off the columns that you would want and use them in your model, and your code is very, very manageable, very, very short at the moment and just gives you one single line. It's quite neat as compared to what it was before. I definitely want to talk about a few tips and tricks and a few quirks that made me sad while I was working with this particular feature. Let me just talk about it. So the first trick is that you can actually define all the functions at once which are there in your model. So if you've made, let's say, 3 functions and I want to take a look at the definition of those functions, make changes of those functions, I can just maybe right click on the functions right here. In the quick queries, I can say define all the functions in the model. And this is literally going to define all of the functions right here in the model. Not necessarily these functions are going to be evaluated because you don't really have the input parameters right here. But hey, you would obviously be able to take a look at all these functions, make changes to it and update the model with all the changes at once, and all your functions logic is going to change at once. This is nice. The other thing that you can do is that once you have created one function, not before that, once you have created one function, it actually gives you the syntactical hint. So if you right click on any particular function and you click on quick queries, it actually helps you with this particular feature, define a new function. This does not appear if you don't have any one function already created. Now, if I just maybe click on define a new function, it actually gives you all the syntactical things that you would need. It would give you the define keyword, the function keyword, the name of the function that you can obviously change, the input parameters, and at the moment the function is going to return the value 1, and that's the name of the new function. So if you want to run it, you can run it. If you want to change it, you can change it. This does not require you to remember the syntax, but it only appears, my God, if you have created the first function, which is not nice. Now, there are a few more quirks which are not good, like literally not good, that I want to point it out, and hopefully Microsoft solves these quirks very, very soon. So the first quirk is that there are no optional parameters in the function. That means that if you are probably creating, let's say, the calendar function that we created right here, and if the user decides not to put the fiscal year in the calendar auto function, the only input that goes inside of this function is the fiscal year or the month year ending of the financial year. If the user decides not to put it, you can't really declare that as an optional parameter. So whatever parameters that you declare inside of the bracket after the name of the function, you have to necessarily declare it. You have to provide those inputs. At the moment, there is no option of creating optional parameters, and that's kind of not good. The other quirk that I don't like is that at the moment, there is not a good way of writing descriptions of what the parameters are. That means how do you write it? What should be the value expected and things like that. If you write this high value function, the only two things that you're actually going to see is the calc express and the target. Now, obviously the user is not going to be able to understand that what exactly do you mean by that. There is not a robust way of doing it, and I kind of don't like it. The other really big quirk in the model in the functions is that let's just say that if you go ahead and change the name of this particular function from a high val to, let's just say that you call it high value, and that's your function's name. Now, if you click on the update model and add new function, this is going to add a new function, and this is not going to change the references of the function that you have already created. You can see that the definition of the function is pretty much the same. I just changed the name of the function. Technically, it should override the function that I have created, but it's not. So if I just maybe click on add new function, click on update model, I have a new function called the high value function, and my old function, which is high val, still exists, and all the references of those high val still are referring to high val and not the new high value function. Not good, perhaps. I don't like it that much. Here is my personal take on the user-defined functions. If you think about it, the user-defined functions, they just take a long piece of code that you have to use it over and over again in your model and just make it shorter by defining them at the back. And that's all that they do. If you think about it, in our consulting company, Goodly Insights, we do a lot of Power BI modeling for our clients, high value clients. And the thing is that there are only 5 to 10% of the time when the logic is truly replicable in a vast majority of the different kind of models that we make. So I'm looking at 5 to 10% usage of that just to make the DAX code shorter. Is it going to make it faster? I don't know. Probably not, because it's just the function at the back. It just definitely makes the DAX code shorter and nothing much about it. So I don't think this is a game-changing feature. It's a cool feature, but not really a game-changing feature. What would truly be game-changing is that if I were able to capture all of these functions in a central repository, maybe GitHub, maybe SharePoint, someplace, put them all there, and then as I need them, I can install them in my Power BI from a central location. And I would then be able to make edits to that function in the current model and use them in my current way. This, however, is just only 10% to 20% of the functions that I use entirely in my Power BI to define logic, but still that 10% improvement of not writing long-wielded DAX is still going to help me a lot. But at the moment, Power BI has no way to centrally define the functions someplace. I think a tabular editor is going to be able to do that. They were promising some videos on that. I think that's going to be nice, but natively in Power BI, that's not possible just as yet. The other major thing is that this is at the moment just a preview feature. So it might not work as expected, might throw errors. We don't even know, it's just out yet. Looks cool, definitely, but I still have to study this under various contexts and various use cases to be able to come up with truly ingenious use cases for this, where this truly makes sense to not write long DAX, but use a function instead. I'll definitely look for more use cases. In case you're not following me on LinkedIn and my newsletter, that's where I post a lot of these short piece of content where I've found an ingenious use of any particular thing in Excel or in Power BI. Please do follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter, and you shall hear from me. My next favorite thing is definitely Power Query, and I want to show you some very interesting tricks in Power Query that I just created a while ago. I will see you in that video. Cheers.